Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Tonight, we get into the schools and the questions and concerns about sending our kids back to the classrooms. Now, you're going to be a big part of tonight's program and our conversation. Our phone lines, we're opening them up right now. We will field your calls and talk about whether or not you'll be comfortable sending your children back to class in the middle of a COVID outbreak. Toll-free number, it's right there on the screen. I suggest you call early. The lines fill up. Now, if you'd rather email us or send a tweet, you can. You can reach us at rfl@rnntv.com or on Twitter at LarryEP13. We can share your messages with our audience. Now, before we get into all of that and the latest developments, we're going to give you a snapshot of where we are right now with COVID. And unfortunately, it's not a pretty picture. Hospitals in many areas, they have run out of supplies, beds, and even staff. Testing still a disaster. The federal response, to put it politely, a disorganized mess. Plus, the United States is failing to tamp down the spread, even though countries like Italy and Spain managed to bend their curve several weeks ago. Now, this map clearly shows you how we are headed in the wrong direction. That sea of orange and red, it indicates the areas that are experiencing growing numbers of cases, and that's nearly 40 states. Overall, we have 3.5 million Americans who have tested positive, and more than 138,000 of our fellow citizens have died. Perhaps the saddest and most infuriating part of all this is, it did not have to be this way. Now, I want to be honest. We didn't cause COVID. That was brought to our shores. I understand that. But the rest of the world, at least the developed world, is in a much better place than us, and that it could have been different. I want to bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, to explain why.
And as you said, Rich, it's such a waste of time and a waste of lives. And at this point, there's really no other explanation for it than the failings of our national government. After all, 1 month ago today, Vice President Mike Pence wrote this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. There isn't a coronavirus second wave, he wrote. Whatever the media says, he added, our approach has been a success. A month later, we have 1.4 million new cases and lost an additional 21,000 lives and counting, all since Pence's mission accomplished op-ed. And it's getting worse, especially compared to the rest of the world. Yesterday alone, 132 nations reported 0 COVID deaths. The United States had 1,000, the second highest in the world. Now look to the bottom of the screen. South Korea, 0. Across much of Europe, 0. 2 deaths in Japan, 4 each in Germany and Spain. Every major European nation other than the UK below 20 deaths yesterday. That's why Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and others in Europe are now planning to reopen schools. And there's little debate on the safety of being able to do so. It's also why the economies in Europe, especially Germany and France, are already rebounding. So is Canada's, despite being hobbled by the lack of a recovery here in the United States. In fact, all these countries and most of the rest of the world has reached the point that President Trump pretends the U.S. has reached. With the virus down, they can reopen schools and rebuild economies. We could be there too right now, but we didn't do the work to combat the virus that other nations did. And we're still not doing it. The experts increasingly coming to the opposite conclusion that Mike Pence reached a month ago. A second wave is coming, they say, as well as a spike in COVID deaths. In fact, you can see the problem playing out right now in real time. Just head to the Alabama-Georgia border. Alabama has had half as many cases and half as many deaths as Georgia, and given their populations, the states are in about the same shape. We think they're in the same shape because Georgia didn't report new cases or deaths yesterday, but despite their similarities, the states are now on dramatically different paths. Georgia's governor just banned cities and counties from issuing mandatory mask orders. Even in Atlanta, the ninth largest metro region in America, no mask order allowed. While next door in Alabama,
I am announcing a statewide mandatory mask wearing effective starting tomorrow, July 15th at 5 p.m. to be in place until the end of the month.
All that yesterday. And what was President Trump doing yesterday? Certainly not meeting with the White House task force or forming a plan to finally combat the virus. No, he, among other things, sent out a photo of himself posing with Goya products instead. And the virus marches on. Now back to Rich and his focus on schools.
All right, Andrew, thank you. Now, first of all, I'm a parent and I want my kids back in school. I'd like them back this fall like everybody else. I don't want lockdowns. I don't want quarantines. My kids do better inside a classroom. This is not healthy for our country or for our kids. But as you can tell, what frustrates me to no end is the fact, again, we did not have to be in the middle of July where we are as a country now, heading in the wrong direction. If we had a functioning government that actually acted as adults and didn't make politics first or attack science, we would have had a handle on this. Not because I think we could have, but because I look around the world. Listen, other major industrialized countries we were pointing fingers at not that too many months ago, but now they look at us and say, we could be the United States. So what I want to do right now is I want to table our debate as to whether or not what our government is doing or not is right, but instead get into the reality of where we are. Our president, our education secretary, they're hell-bent on getting schools to reopen. The president has even threatened to withhold funding for districts that do not. Today, it was VP Mike Pence's turn to make the same pitch.
We don't want CDC guidance to be a reason why people don't reopen their schools. That guidance will continue to be developed and produced, and we'll be working very closely with states and school systems around the country to implement plans. But President Trump has said it. We'll say it again today. We got to get our kids back in the classroom.
For anybody who lost it, I'll translate. That's political speak to say, schools, if you don't follow the CDC, or if you rather do follow the CDC health guidelines, don't let it stop you from bringing kids into the classrooms. Forget science. Open the doors today like it was nothing going on with COVID. Now, if you thought that was bad, I want you to listen to what the White House press secretary said just a couple hours ago.
The president has said unmistakably that he wants schools to open, and I was just in the Oval talking to him about that. And when he says open, he means open and full, kids being able to attend each and every day at their school. The science should not stand in the way of this.
Science should not stand in the way of this. Some of the largest districts in the country not ready to restart in-person classes yet, even at the threat of cutoff funding, including in that list in California. If you're in San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, all of them will not reopen to students when the academic year starts next month. Take a listen to the head of the LA school district making what I think is a very well thought out argument against bringing kids back too soon.
Reopening schools will significantly increase the interaction between children and adults from different families. A 10-year-old student might have a 30-year-old teacher, a 50-year-old bus driver, or live with a 70-year-old grandmother. All need to be protected. There's a public health imperative to keep schools from becoming a petri dish.
Houston will also start the year with distance learning. Take a listen to the superintendent who explains why.
As a former teacher, face-to-face is the best for our children, but right now it's not safe to do that. And so we have to fall back on what the option that is available that is safe.
Now, the governor is threatening to cut funding in Texas to districts that don't offer in-person options, and the head of the teachers union there, based in Austin, is calling that a form of blackmail. Not my words, his. Arizona, another state that's getting hit hard with COVID, and teachers in the Phoenix area are pushing the state to delay the start of classes. And this school board member in Phoenix is visibly upset.
Governor Ducey, Superintendent Hoffman, and our legislators, we are calling upon you to do what is right. If you open schools this fall and we see an increase in infections and death, you will have the blood of our students, our teachers, and their families on your hands.
Florida's become one of the epicenters in the U.S., but despite the soaring number of cases, hospitalizations, and yes, deaths, the governor, he says no, he wants the schools open.
I'm confident if you can do Home Depot, if you can do Walmart, if you can do these things, we absolutely can do the schools. I want our kids to be able to minimize this education gap that I think is developed.
You get that? If it's good enough for Walmart, it's good enough for the kids. This teacher in Tampa strongly disagrees.
But as soon as one teacher dies or one child dies, it's going to be on them.
Now, I can't think of a better guest to speak to this. Daniel Domenech, he is the executive director of the American Association of School Administrators nationwide. First of all, thank you for the time. And I know you've been working for months now with your organization to try and have schools across this country open as safely as possible. How hard is it to have such a moving target, not just because of the unpredictability of the virus, but we just played a litany of sound from the president, the vice president, the secretary of education, all saying they're not going to even use the CDC guidelines, basically telling schools just open. How can you figure out how to safely plan to reopen when your own government is egging people to do it or even face financial consequences?
I think you nailed it. It's an incredibly difficult and stressful decision that has to be made. But the bottom line is safety and following the CDC, regardless of what the administration wants to do. No one is going to put themselves in a situation where they're not going to regard the safety and welfare of students, open the doors to every student, and then you know what's going to happen. We saw what's happened in bars and restaurants and beaches when everybody was just allowed to come in. People are going to get sick, and undoubtedly people are going to die. And that's not a situation that any educator, and certainly not the superintendents who are the person responsible for what happens, want to be in that situation. So you're going to see most districts open with the hybrid plan. But here's the thing, ever since the president and the secretary started their push last year to say open up, come hell or high water, what most districts are beginning to do now is say, well, we're not going to open at all. We're going to do home, we're going to do remote learning, A, because you're not giving us the money, and B, because you're disregarding the safety and welfare of these folks. We want to open. I can tell you right now that every superintendent, every teacher, every principal, they want the children back in school. That's the job, to have the youngsters in school and educate them. But at the same time, they're not going to be bullied into an unsafe environment, and they're going to make sure that when they do open, that they have the resources to do it so that everybody's safe.
I just hope, and I think my audience understands the bizarre perversity where you have every superintendent, every teacher wants to be in the classroom. Certain states, forgetting even the federal government, the governors are extorting the districts, saying you're not going to get state funding if you don't open. Anyway, bizarre. But now, so here's the problem I got. How do you figure out, let's say a state like Georgia, where Atlanta put in mask requirements, then the governor says, nope, no mask requirements, I'm overriding it. Does that mean you could have some teachers with masks, some without, some administrators with, some without, some kids with, without? Do you have it? Can you at least have uniformity when they come through the doors?
No, and that's the problem. There has been no guidance at the national level. The guidance at the state level, except for certain states, has been missing. So it's really being left up to the localities. And that's why, to some extent, it's going to be the boards of education and superintendents in these communities that are going to make the decisions. In places like Georgia, right now, you see that Atlanta, the Cobb School District outside of Georgia, they're saying, you know what, we're not going to open up. We're going to do remote learning until the situation is safe. This business of ignoring the guidelines, of ignoring the wearing of masks, or ignoring the space issues is just a route to disaster. And it's just not going to happen. And by the way, they can talk all they want about withholding aid. They don't have the power to do that. Certainly not at the national level. A governor might be able to do it at the state level, but they would be hard pressed to do that. So that is a threat that is not scaring anybody.
So you got so many balls you're trying to juggle to help out with these superintendents, but I'll go through some. You probably got more than I've ever thought of, but start at the beginning of the day. Kids got to get on a bus. How do you navigate? You still have the same amount of kids as you did last year, conceivably, and you only got so many seats. How do you navigate that? How do you navigate, for example, malls in New York can't open unless they've changed their air filtration system. Are we going to have safer malls than we will schoolrooms? Walk me through some of the moving targets that the general public may not realize, but you guys are trying to navigate in real time.
Sure. So the bus issue that you just brought up. So under these guidelines, in order to transport the same number of students to school, you're going to need 2 or 3 buses as opposed to 1. So right there, you're talking at a significant increase in cost. At the building level, okay, The average classroom, let's say, that has 24 students in it, well, with social spacing, you can only have 12. So if you have 12 students in a class, who's taking care of the other 12? That means you need another teacher. That's additional expenses. Sanitizing the building. What happens when a child gets sick or a staff member gets sick? Well, when that happens, you're in a position now where the school has to shut down. It has to be sanitized. And depending on the guidelines, it could take a couple of days. It could take a couple of weeks for the schools to reopen. So these are the many issues that have to be considered and dealt with. They all cost money. There's no question about it. But if we want safety, and we have to do what has to be done. The government has spent trillions of dollars bailing out the airline industry, bailing out other businesses. Well, if you want to consider the public schools as the largest child care provider in the country, and that's an industry, then bail out the schools. Provide the dollars to make sure that the children and the staff in those buildings are safe.
Finally, Dan, I look at the calendar, and I got kids in school and also one heading off to college. They're intentionally trying to time, as impossible as that is, when the second spike happens in the fall or at least the winter months. Are you guys preparing for that inevitable second spike that happens with every pandemic? Do you guys almost consider the likelihood is you're going to start, but you're not going to be able to finish?
Exactly. And that's part of the planning, that we know, as I mentioned earlier, that inevitably there's going to be someone that's going to get sick in a building. And when that happens, the building is going to have to shut down. This is going to be a school year like no other. I hear people saying, do you think things are going to be normal? No, there is no normal. I don't think that there ever will be. It's going to be a very difficult process. But again, the guiding light is that our members, we recommend do whatever you need to do to ensure safety. That's the guiding light here.
Well, I know you guys in the front lines have at least got the priorities right. Let's hope it goes all the way to the top. Dan, I appreciate a few minutes. Best of luck to you.
Thank you very much, Richard.
All right, everybody, when we come back, I want to hear from you. Now, you might be a parent out there, you might be an educator. It doesn't matter. Wherever you fall on this, sound off. Toll-free lines open. You see the number right there on the screen, 888-766-2428. Are you going to be comfortable sending your kids back to school? We all want to do it, but at the end of the day, are you going to put them on that bus? We're going to get your reaction after this.